And so really the test is going to be, is a Democrat going to get in 28 and then undo all of this work in like 6 months?
Is the war in the Middle East coming to an end, and what are the implications of Pope Leo's latest document on the poor for U.S. politics? We'll cover that and more in this episode of In Focus. Hello and welcome to In Focus. My name is Stephen Cox. I'm here today with Gen Z influencer Wade Searles. Wade, thanks for being here today on this show of In Focus.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephen. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so we usually talk about primarily U.S. politics, but the implications of the potential peace deal in the Gaza conflict are so enormous that we felt we had to discuss it today. Trump, at the moment, Wade, is over in Israel. He just gave a big speech to the Knesset there. That's a legislative body in Israel. He's also on his way to Egypt. Before getting into everything that he talked about, as well as the implications of this for, all of us, because, Gen Z Americans were very involved and opinionated on how this conflict was being carried out. I just want to get your first thoughts on the fact that we are at this stage in the game where it does seem that at least parts of Trump's 20-point peace plan are being accepted. Hostages have been released. What are your initial thoughts on where we're at the moment before we get into going on to what's going forward?
Yeah, well, a lot of people originally didn't think this was possible. There were a lot of political commentators that were sort of preparing for some kind of potential war with Iran, especially earlier this year with the strikes against the Iran nuclear facilities. And so it's sort of interesting that Trump has managed to really strong arm both parties here. Obviously, Trump is the main factor in the equation pushing for peace. And a lot of people believed he couldn't get it done. This is a conflict that has been brewing for decades between Israel and the other regions in the Middle East. So it's really incredible that Trump has managed to get this far. And who knows if this peace deal will last? But Trump seems extremely dedicated to making sure that this is part of his legacy. Trump seems very focused on ensuring that peace is sort of enforced around the world. You see this with Russia and Ukraine. Trump is extremely involved in that conflict and wants to bring it to an end. Putin has mentioned this many times. Trump seems very invested in making sure that there's really no war around the world. And it seems that Trump wants to be remembered as a peace president when he leaves office. That's really, it seems to be his top priority, is making sure that when he is out of office, he has this legacy of the man who ended all these wars. And this is why he stresses in every speech that these wars would have never happened if he won in 2020, or if the election wasn't stolen in 2020. And so it's really remarkable that he's managed to get this far. I'm not sure if the peace deal will last, but it seems to be pretty promising.
I think there are signs that it will be actually something more than just, temporary ceasefire. They had a big rally in Israel where Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump gave speeches. The prisoners have been released. Trump just gave a speech to the Israeli Knesset, as I mentioned. I'll get your thoughts on that in just a second. So it does seem that we are coming to the end of this. Now, I must say that, for as much as Trump has will be wanting to have his legacy be the peace president, he did oversee the last 2 years. Well, this conflict did begin October of 2024, and so there has been so much bloodshed that has been taking place here. And yes, it did precede Trump, but because he got back in, it is I think something to be debated whether or not he actually has brought this to the peace deal where it is. I know others will debate that. Others will say, well, look at the place that Gaza has become. It was a genocide, and, that we needed to have firmer action up front. But I think we can all say, at this moment, we must all always fight to make sure never again, because you see these videos coming out of this situation, and it is horrific, and there's been so many civilian casualties and death. And so it is something to debate. But let's talk first about his Knesset speech. I know you read through that and listened to that. What did he actually tell the Jewish lawmakers over there, and how has his efforts are they being received over in Israel?
Yeah, so his speech was well received. He opened, before he even began speaking, and started with a standing ovation. So obviously this is very popular among Israelis. And I think really the optics of this peace deal for Trump are amazing. And I think especially in Israel, they recognize that. And clearly the move in Israel is to double down on Trump and sort of accept the huge W that Trump has offered them on a silver platter. Because it's true that Gaza is effectively destroyed. Like, we're calling it a peace deal, but the war has already been won. Hamas is not really the threat that it was, especially not back during October 7th of 2023. And so, so many videos have come out of Gaza that just show it's like a total wasteland now. And so really when you see these negotiations, it's like, you have the whole country of Israel with the full backing of the United States government. And they're supposedly negotiating with like what's left of Gaza. There's like 4 standing buildings left or something.
I know during this process too that Miriam Adelson was involved and visited the White House, as well as Sheldon Adelson too, right?
Yeah, and so Sheldon Adelson and Miriam Adelson have been, and Sheldon Adelson has passed, but Miriam Adelson has been one of the biggest donors in the 2024 election, and her single biggest issue was ensuring that Israel, their interests are secured, especially in this region. And so Trump made a huge reference to this during the speech. He made light of this, and he went into this whole story about how Sheldon Adelson would show up to the White House and, sort of unannounced, like Sheldon would just call Trump that morning and be like, "Hey, I want to see you today." And Trump said, "Doesn't really work that way since I'm the president of the United States, but yeah, come on over." And Trump even made a reference to Miriam. He was shouting out Miriam a lot, saying that, she's humble, but she is like infinity money to give towards this cause. And so he told her to stand up, and he told a story about, he asked her privately, apparently, who she likes more, America or Israel. And she wouldn't answer. And so he was joking that I think that might mean Israel. It's interesting that, in any other context, it would be kind of maybe like an inappropriate thing to say. But this is just classic Trump. He just blurts things out like that. So I loved that. I thought that was pretty funny.
I do have the same worries that you do moving forward. The entire region's been obliterated, and Kim Iverson, who's a commentator on all of the geopolitical implications of this, recently put out a video expressing her great concerns with the potential involvement of former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair in the rebuilding of the Gaza region. And her concern is that they're going to just rebuild this and use it as a sort of test city, if you will, to monitor the people there, to spy on them, and it seems that might be the case. So let's play a quick clip of Kim there commenting on this.
Netanyahu and Trump met at the White House, where they have unveiled a plan for Gaza. Gaza will be governed under the temporary transitional governance of a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee with oversight and supervision by a new international transitional body, the Board of Peace, which will be headed and chaired by President Donald J. Trump, with other members and heads of state to be announced, including former Prime Minister Tony Blair. This body will set the framework and handle the funding for the redevelopment of Gaza. This body will call on best international standards to create modern and efficient governance that serves the people of Gaza, and it's conducive to attracting investment. All right, let's break that down in plain English. So Tony Blair is the guy that is marching in the digital ID into the UK. He's heavily involved in the WEF. He was slated for potentially taking over for Klaus Schwab.
The crucial thing will be how Gaza is governed afterwards. There are a lot of different scenarios that people put forward. No one is going to put money back into Gaza unless there's some stable framework for the future. Hamas cannot control Gaza.
He's very, very big on spying on everybody. Spy on everybody, see what everybody's doing, and then we can control everybody. That's his big, what he's into.
Digital ID, facial recognition, body cams, CCTVs, a command center, crime patterns, data, fingerprint matches, smarter tools. Change is inevitable.
So they're basically going to unleash complete and total surveillance on the Palestinians. They're going to basically use them as a testing ground for everything they're going to do to us. They're going to try it on them first. And they're going to say, well, you have no choice. And people are going to go along with it because they're going to say, well, you're a bunch of terrorists. Obviously, we have to spy on you. Obviously, we have to keep an eye on you. Obviously, we have to know what your every move is because you're a bunch of terrorists. That is always, in the name of safety, that is always the excuse for unleashing this type of big brother surveillance. So that's the plan. They're going to use them as a testing ground for all the surveillance that the Israelis have created, that they then want to sell to everywhere in the world.
That I think is very worrisome, especially to me. And, going forward, we'll have to keep monitoring this, Wade, and see how things play out. Again, we don't know at this moment if this peace deal is going to last. But the last comment on this that I have is, I do think Trump is becoming more aware of his mortality. And on his plane ride actually over to the Middle East, he did say that he's worried about his place in eternity. He said he wasn't sure if he was going to get into heaven, but he did say, I have done my best to save as many millions of lives as possible. And so this is clearly weighing on him. I know he was at Walter Reed getting a health checkup for the second time in 6 months just this past week. Here's a quick clip of Trump on Air Force One saying that.
I'm being a little cute. I don't think there's anything going to get me in heaven, okay? I really don't. I think I'm not maybe heaven bound. I may be in heaven right now as we fly in Air Force One. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make heaven. But I've made life a lot better for a lot of people. And, as an example, had the election of 2020 not been rigged, you would have millions of people living just in Russia, Ukraine alone. That would have never happened. And it didn't happen for 4 years. And I knew Putin very well. It was the apple of his eye. All the things I've said would have never happened. We had an incompetent administration. We had an incompetent president. And because of a crooked election, millions of people are dead. And by the way, the Israeli thing was much harder to get settled because of the past administration. Okay?
So, Wade, those are the president's remarks. What do you make of those? I mean, it sounds like, this is a sort of Catholic approach. Like he's really worried about his eternal salvation, and it's sort of curious to hear a president speak like this.
Yeah, well, it's a really uncharacteristically humble moment for him. For him to say, for him to be so openly uncertain about whether or not he's getting into heaven, because most people just assume that's a given. And I think it's important to remember that none of us really know. And through Jesus, we can inherit the kingdom of heaven. But with Trump, it seems, he's really trying to make it happen. And I think it speaks a lot to his character. It was a really heartwarming moment to hear that, because you really don't see politicians talk about their salvation like that. And I hope this reflects, as we travel further into his presidency, I hope this reflects an attitude from him going forward, that he's going to be more focused on his salvation and hopefully the salvation of the country. I think that when a president starts talking like this, in these particular terms, where he is uncertain of his own personal salvation, I think what you're going to see is a lot of his followers and a lot of Americans wondering about their own. And I think that is a good thing. So I like to see him talking about heaven in this way. And it's a little sad. A lot of people on Twitter were like, where are his faith advisors telling him he's certainly making it because he's the greatest jobs president of all time? And it's like, we don't really know, actually. And so I think I think it was nice to see from him. I liked it.
I do want to say a special prayer for him, because when you do get older, you start to have health issues, and he might know that he has something going on. We don't know. We probably won't ever know. You do start to think about your mortality, and maybe sometimes you despair. So he's sitting here saying, I don't know if I'm going to get in. I hope that's not the case with him, that he's just losing faith, and that this is why we trust in our Lord, because with our Lord all things are possible. He makes up for our deficiencies and pours upon us his grace and mercy when we're at his judgment. So definitely say a prayer for the president. And, so shifting a little bit here, Wade, internationally, this will be hopefully received as a good thing if it happens. President Putin actually praised Trump as well. He said that Trump should have received the Nobel Peace Prize. It actually went to Maria Corina Machado. She's the opposition leader in Venezuela. She actually dedicated her award to President Trump, which I thought was good. But, this reminds me of the award that was given to Barack Obama for literally no reason other than running a presidential campaign when he first ran in 2008. And I was around back then. I actually went to a few Obama rallies. Don't tell anybody. But this sort of cheapens the award, if you ask me. I think Trump was, of everybody, most deserving. If you're going to give it to anybody, now I know everybody will say, well, of course he overseen and turned the other way while all this genocide was taking place. But has there been anyone else on the world stage trying to at least in some way bring down these conflicts? I think he's the main one. And the fact that it went to this opposition politician in Venezuela again cheapens the award for me. I'm not sure if you have any high views of this award anymore, like myself, but I'd be curious to know.
Well, the award has been cheapened, and like no one in my generation takes the award seriously anymore, because they just hand it out like candy. Like if you successfully sell lemonade at a lemonade stand next to the grocery store, you get your free Nobel Peace Prize. And so, Trump is, of course, deserving of it, but I don't think people are really putting any stock in awards like this anymore. They just give them to anyone for any reason. It's really just used as a political prop now. Like, if you're a liberal and you stood for democracy, well, then here's your 500 awards, your New York Times bestselling book deal. And, so it's really kind of like, it has been cheapened for sure. But I think with Putin, I think really the angle here is, Putin is so good at playing politics. And it's, of course, like, if you're trying to appeal to Trump and you're in the middle of negotiations with the United States under Trump's control, then of course the move is to say, like, look at how great this man is. Like, he's trying to make peace all over the world. Like, I'm sure Trump is watching this clip and loving it. So he's definitely playing more to Trump's ego there. And so it's good, but he's also right. Like, Trump is doing more than anyone else to stop all the wars around the world and to prevent more from cropping up. And so I think he is deserving of that award. And I think as he tries to make his legacy about peace, we're going to see more like that from him.
Well, another front that Trump is going to have to take on is coming from the Vatican, of all places. At his most recent speech at the UN, Trump said that there's a twin enemy that's emerging in the 21st century, and that's open borders and climate change, which he called a con job. Well, actually, those two topics were primarily highlighted by Pope Leo in the Vatican in his latest apostolic exhortation, De Lexite. And he said primarily that climate change hurts the poor disproportionately, and that Western countries must be open to migrants. And so it seems, Wade, that the Vatican is once again, as it did under Pope Francis, willing to take Trump and the nationalist, anti-globalist movement in the entire West head on. So I don't know if all our viewers saw or read the document. I read it all. It was 90 pages long. It really does seem to be a UN-type liberation theology document from literally the 1970s. It talks a lot about the poor, yes, which obviously is important. But, Wade, it seems to me this is a bit of a tone-deaf document. There's so many issues that the Vatican, being the moral authority of the world, could touch on right now. Divorce, rampant drug abuse, addiction, feminism, gender mutilation surgeries. I mean, we can go on. This document really seems to be out of touch. I don't know if you have any general overall thoughts on it and how it's going to now play into U.S. politics, because the Pope has injected himself into the matter, whether he wants to or not.
Well, clearly it's part of this trend to sort of morally undermine the Trump administration. And, the Trump administration has been doing good work with ICE, deporting illegals. And so it seems more of this effort to sort of give the opposition to this effort a moral cover. Because, of course, the argument from the right is, why would you oppose deporting these illegals? Because they're often, rapists, drug dealers, terrorists in a lot of cases. At the bare minimum, we have no idea who these people are. And so it sort of gives the left moral cover. They want to use the image of the innocent migrant, like the crying Mexican kid, and now we have to tear up the Constitution because children are crying on TV. And so it really just provides moral cover to the opposition. But I think in particular, it's important to note that Trump, this is his final term, and so he's on his way out. And so I think what everyone's thinking about now is how 26 is going to go and how 28 is going to go. And in 28 in particular, of course, J.D. Vance is obviously going to be running. And when he runs, he's going to be running as like a Catholic, because he is a Catholic. And so I think really this is laying the foundations to undermine a potential Vance campaign. Because, of course, if Trump doesn't successfully complete the wall and he exits office, and you could say, as far as border security goes, he had the most secure border and he deported this many people. For the people that he deported, there is a steady decline in the foreign-born population, but we're really only back to like February 2024 levels. So it's not the most insane mass deportation effort that's ever occurred, although it's been branded that way. And so really the test is going to be, is a Democrat going to get in 28 and then undo all of this work in like 6 months? And so I think that's the real battle if Trump can't do something that outlives him, like finishing the wall or passing significant legislation like an immigration moratorium that outlives him. I think that's the real battle is 28. And so you see this effort to undermine Trump, but it's really undermining whoever the Republican nominee is going to be in 2028 because they don't want Trump's legacy to survive him in that way.
Oh, absolutely. I think this is a very dangerous document for Republicans. As we all know, when Leo was a cardinal, he was tweeting articles from the dissident website National Catholic Reporter attacking Vice President Vance and his positions on immigration. And of course, Vance laid out a very Catholic, it is a Catholic position on ordo amoris, meaning there's an order to charity, right? First you love your family, then your city, then your state, then your country, then you can open up yourself to migrants and others in need. And I think this is clearly where Leo is coming from. Again, he blessed a glacier the other day with Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's not a Catholic, and who gave a speech at this event, and he was just like dreaming about how the church can use its influence to promote climate protection. And, unfortunately, Leo himself spoke about our common home being this earth. And of course, we all know as Catholics and Christians that our home is in heaven, right? And so, this, again, document, when I read it, it kind of read like AOC talking points. And we, of course, know AOC is going to probably run for president in 2028. If not 28, then later on, because it's also rumored she might be running to replace Chuck Schumer coming up, who's, I think, now getting in his very late 70s. So, the Democrats are going to weaponize this document. Of course, it's all very predictable, as they always do, to promote, again, open borders, more immigrants, etc. And you're seeing right now the bishops actually in the United States get behind that. There were bishops, I believe, I forget which state it was, but they just had a Eucharistic procession, and they went to an ICE facility, a detention facility, and they were denied admission. But this is the sort of stuff that you're going to get because most clergy, or not most, many in this country are very liberal, social justice minded, and they're taking cues from what the Vatican is saying on all this, and they're going to just keep attacking Republicans. And so I think it is incumbent, especially upon Republicans and Catholics who understand these issues, to clarify actually what the church has taught about things like the death penalty, as well as border security, and other things that President Trump is doing, and why it's important to not give these talking points out there. Because, again, maybe, I'm not sure if you saw it, Wade, President Obama just put out a statement, a video remarks, attacking authoritarianism rising in Europe. So, again, the optics as well as the arguments that are being used by the Vatican right here are very dangerous because, again, it's opening up and utilizing leftist talking points, and the left is only going to continue to capitalize that. And Archbishop Vigano called this out in a recent tweet, and he said, look, this is a corruption of the papacy, unfortunately, and it's being used at the service of Agenda 2030 and the rest of the global elites. So this is a major concern. I do think, though, I kind of want to ask you, you're of the Gen Z generation. How are the Zoomers really seeing all of this play out? I know there's a lot of young persons in the Gen Z movement who are very serious about their faith and who want to go to Mass and get into heaven, as President Trump obviously does as well. But how are they viewing this papacy so far? And this doesn't seem to me to be what they kind of are hoping for in remarks from the Vatican.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think when Pope Leo got in, a lot of people were they were really wanting to be relieved, because I know for a lot of people my age especially that are looking into Catholicism or converting actively, or they already are Catholic, I know Pope Francis was a big hang-up for a lot of people, and it's something that it's easy to sort of ignore, in the sense that when Pope Francis comes out and does something that is against like traditional American conservative values or something like that, or makes some statement that's kind of hard to square with ideological conservatism, it is easy to ignore, and you can kind of look away from it. But then when Pope Leo came in, everyone was gushing and relieved, and the hope was, finally we're going to have someone who maybe is, even if he's not like the most conservative guy ever personally, the hope was maybe he's at least going to finally like stay out of politics in American politics. And so I think really the disappointment is that not necessarily that he's going to be just more like a Francis type where he's actively pushing back against conservatives in America, but it's more just so the disappointment that he's not kind of staying out of it. And, you know, I think there was no reasonable expectation for him to do so. So I think that's where a lot of maybe some disappointment comes from. But I do think that, you know, with Pope Leo, I'm not sure that he's going to be still as much of a ideological radical as Pope Francis was. And so I think a lot of people in my generation feel the same way. And so we're just kind of looking for more from him. Like his papacy is in its infancy. And so there has been a lot of concerning signs, like obviously this statement and the climate stuff. But I think with my generation, a lot of people were kind of expecting that as far as the climate things go. And so we're looking towards really like what is going to be done with the 28 election and how he's sort of like laying the groundwork for that.
I'm reminded of various statements Charlie Kirk actually said when Leo was elected, and how he was just disappointed in a lot of what he was seeing coming out of the Vatican. And it seemed like he had a great interest actually in looking into the church itself. And I suppose, you know, we can look to the future and see what evolves. But it reminds me, actually, we have a population bomb going off right now. That we are not replacing ourselves. People are delaying marriage till late 30s. Home ownership is being delayed as well because we can't get out of debt. So what did you make of those comments in light of everything we're talking about here with Leo, as well as just, you know, young people themselves, again, who this generation I see, Wade, are very much, I think, potential can turn around this tide, who want to be traditional minded, who want to have traditional gender roles, and who do want to get married.
Yeah, well, with Charlie Kirk, he was a huge leader of my generation, obviously, and especially with young men. And one of his biggest hangups with Catholicism that it seems he was really looking into was the things that we saw from Pope Francis, even a little from Pope Leo. And so it's just unfortunate, like people in my generation who are looking into Catholicism, like that is the most common hangup that I see when I talk to people about that. And it is unfortunate. It's really sad. And what you're really seeing is, you know, a lot of conservative young men, they're ranking in terms of what they view as their most successful. I'm not sure if you saw this data, but new data's come out where there were 4 groups who were asked, you know, what more closely defines their definition of personal success. And they asked Trump voting young men, Trump voting young women, Harris voting young men, and Harris voting young women. And the only group who ranked getting married and having kids anywhere near the top of the list was Trump voting young men. And so what you have is a lot of Gen Z young men are, you know, sort of aspiring to be fathers. They're aspiring to raise families, presumably in the faith. But unfortunately, the women have now gone into the career field. And this is really just a consequence of the sexual revolution in a true sense, where, you know, you could say that maybe 100 years ago, it was the men who were solely focused on the careers, and they were focused on building the nation and like reaching the moon and doing all these great things at their job. And it was the women who were sort of trying to tie them down and get them to settle down and have kids and start a family and bring the kids to church and everything like that. And men were really like leading the nation in that way, where they were making all the progress. They were making all the civilizational progress. Women were sort of in their roles as the helpers, as the partners. But now, like in my generation, the strangest thing has happened where that has completely flipped, where now you have women who now they're the ones where they want the successful career. They want to be, you know, the boss at their job, and they want to be the girl who's making everything happen. And so they're now throwing themselves into their careers. And it's actually the men now who are trying to tie down the women and saying, no, we want to get married to you. We want you to have kids, and we want to start families with you. But unfortunately, you know, it takes two to tango. And so you see the marriage rates completely collapsing, our birth rate is completely collapsing. And it's because I think a lot of people prescribe this as another consequence of the sexual revolution is that sex is no longer tied to marriage. It's no longer sort of behind the wall of marriage. And so a lot of people would think that because sex is no longer tied to procreation in that way, and because it's no longer tied to marriage, that this would actually reduce the incentive for men to get married in particular. And there is some truth to that. But what you've seen now is it's really the women who don't want to get married. And it's the women who perpetuate this sort of hookup culture that you see with all these dating apps and everything. And they're really acting more as like the drug suppliers, where men are sort of the addicts in a sense. And so the dynamics are completely messed up. And I think a lot of young people, especially young men, are looking for that sort of moral leadership. They're looking for someone to come and take the young generation and show them the true moral way, show them what's good and show them the sort of natural order of things. Because the dynamics have completely flipped. It's really like a satanic inversion of what the dating dynamics should be. And a lot of young men are struggling with that. The worst message you could give right now is to tell young women to ignore any pressure to get married at all. Because it's like, don't we live in a civilization that we want to continue? I mean, don't you plant trees that may not grow until you're gone and your future generations enjoy them? I just see no real, it's really like a selfishness. I just see no real desire to continue civilization for the generations after us. And I think that's really unfortunate.
Well said, Wade, very much. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. That's our episode today for InFocus. Follow us on Twitter, as well as go to lifesitenews.com. Find us on YouTube as well. Thank you so much. God bless.
Aloha, everyone. This is Jason Jones for LifeSite News. We hope you enjoyed this video. For more content like this, check the link in the description. You can also connect with us on social media to stay up to date with the latest news on life, faith, family, and freedom. Thanks for watching, and may God bless you.